Hey everybody, how we doing? I am Lucas, the American populist Thompson. You're tuning in to Primetime Patriots, Law with Lucas. Finding us live on Facebook, probably not YouTube. Apparently, we've burned that bridge clear to the ground, which I'm not sad about. Um, but thanks for joining me. I'm going to allow everybody some time to jump on, kind of follow a few comments here, see who all is joining us and from where. Looks like we've got folks from Texas already and California, and hi Sally and hi Mel. Going to be a lot of people jumping on here. So, um, just a few things before we get started. First, Kaylee is backstage. She's going to be helping to tag comments. She's going to take some notes because the goal that I'll tell you all here in a minute a little bit more about is going to be to try to answer as many questions as I can. I'll kind of tell everybody sort of what we're thinking we want to do with this show, what the goal is going to be, and try to keep everybody as engaged as possible. We've had a lot of requests for a show like this for a long time. Um, so many different things going on. It's been very difficult to be able to put together something that we could be consistent about. Um, hey there, hey everybody. But we are going to be consistent. I'm going to have this consistently on Wednesday nights at 7 Central, 8 Eastern. Hi, Deb. We got Diane. I'm missing a lot of people. I apologize. Hey, Elizabeth, Jane, Linda, Carol, got Cece from Wisconsin. My goodness, we're all over the country already. Central Texas, love Central Texas. Iowa, Indiana. I technically work in Richmond, so hello, Indiana. Hungary. Wow, fantastic. All over the world. Great. All right. So, first of all, thank you everybody for joining me tonight. This will be the first Law with Lucas on Wednesday, but won't be the last. I'm going to let you all know right from the get go. Today is going to be kind of a learning session. We're going to tell you a little bit about how kind of start with the Supreme Court because that's really where it all starts, right? Article 3 of the Constitution sets out the Supreme Court. It's original and appellate jurisdiction. It also allows Congress to set up inferior courts to the Supreme Court. Why is that important? So, um, I wrote on Facebook earlier this week. I'll probably just read the quote because I think it's very instructive. It came right out of my spirit when I was trying to think of, what's a positive spin on everything that's going on right now, and what can we expect as we move forward through all of the shenanigans and all the nonsense that's going on. So why don't I just go ahead and read this to you, and I'll let you know kind of how it dovetails into my discussion of the law. America is so much more than a country. It's more than a set of jurisdictional boundaries. It's more than the most powerful country in history. What makes America special is her founding principles: freedom, independence, self determination, equality of opportunity, and other core principles of liberty are uniquely American and relatively new. Never in known history has the power in a nation resided within the heads and hands of its citizens. As long as we remain a constitutional republic, no supreme ruler, no ultimate unchecked power is above these founding principles in a way that renders them passe. Simply put, America is an ideal, really. And because good ideas never die, as Rush Limbaugh once said, America's best days are ahead. So how in the heck are America's best days ahead with everything that's going on? Some people argue that America's best days are behind her. Um, and that's it's possible. It's really hard for any of us to predict how the future of America will go because there's a lot of headwinds, right? Before I go any further, I do need to remind everybody, please like and share, love and share this video. If you're on Facebook, share it out there as wide as you can. Try to break the algorithms, try to get it in front of as many people as we can, because I truly believe, um, as you get into this show, as you get in deeper into the understanding of what the law provides and the checks and balances that Article 3 provide to our Constitution, hopefully it will provide all of you a little bit of comfort where we're headed. So that's what I want to talk about. How can America's best days be ahead of her with all the headwinds that we have in front of us? So we all know, or we should know, that there's three branches of government in the United States. We've got the president, that's Article 1. The president and the administrative power was never intended to be as powerful as it is today. Um, the executive power was initially enumerated, meaning it was specifically set out to lead our military, to lead the many, the very, at the time, few agencies of the court of the United States. And it was basically designed to execute the laws of the land. Whatever laws Congress passed, whatever provisions were in the Constitution, the presidential authority was set out to execute on those powers. As we know, the administrative state, the swamp, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, has gotten immeasurably powerful and wide and vast, and that's a very dark, long, wide, deep rabbit hole to go down. So we're going to leave it right there. But that's Article 1 of the Constitution. Article 2 is Congress and its many enumerated powers, and very specific things that um, it can't do. Article 3, the Supreme Court, was basically set up as a court of original jurisdiction, meaning it would be the first and only place for a case to be heard, and as well as an appellate jurisdiction. So cases that were heard, federal cases that were heard elsewhere, could ultimately be appealed to the Supreme Court. It wasn't until later, in a case called Marbury versus Madison, where the Supreme Court basically gave itself the ability to declare laws constitutional or unconstitutional. Um, the basic long and short of it is the Supreme Court, as many of you already know, is the final um, arbiter of what is legal or illegal in the country, what's constitutional or unconstitutional, what text of particular laws actually means, how they can be interpreted, how they can be used, and how they should be executed on. So, that being said, the Supreme Court is understandably very, very powerful. As such, it's the institution that we anticipate and expect we can depend on the most, to move the least, to be the slowest in reacting, to be the least political, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, back in the late 60s, early 70s, and then forward from there, the court got very, very political. They started taking political um, issues like abortion, and instead of allowing those issues to be resolved in a political way, they found provisions in the Constitution that they could pervert and twist into a reading that allowed them to um, grant specific substantive individual powers to people or to states or to the federal government that didn't previously exist and were not enumerated. So we've kind of like the way that we went away from the gold standard in our monetary policy, we went away from the enumerated power standard in our Constitution. Um, what does that mean for today? Well, it means that basically the Supreme Court, when a Supreme Court justice has an opening, it's one of the most expensive um, processes in our electoral system, because so many people fight tooth and nail against or for specific justices that get nominated to the court. Um, Elections have consequences. The president nominates a justice to the Supreme Court. The Senate will then confirm or reject that nomination. Um, and so, whoever's in the White House, it's a very, very important position. Right now, we currently have a mix of, we have 9 Supreme Court justices. Majority would be 5. So any 5 justices that can agree on something will be, and I agree, Jennifer, everybody needs to read the Constitution. Any 5 justices getting together on an issue, on a topic, will will carry the day. So if they say the sky is orange, for all intents and purposes, under under our law, as the final arbiters of what the law is in the United States, sky is orange. That's how we have Roe v. Wade. That's how we have abortion post week 22 or pre week 22, almost on demand, so on and so forth. So right now we have 3 fairly conservative justices that we can almost always count on voting in a pretty textualist or conservative way, um, voting not to expand, congressional authority to do things that are typically reserved to individuals or the states. Those justices are Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas. There's 3 that are kind of the fence sitters in the middle, either that or we don't really know which direction they're going to go, like Amy Coney Barrett. But those are Amy Coney Barrett, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Roberts, more or less. Roberts, I think I've pretty much decided is more likely to vote with the left, but we'll talk about that later. Amy Coney Barrett, from reading everything she's written over the years, although I once said that about Justice Roberts as well. So who knows how that could ultimately go. But I believe that Justice Barrett will ultimately be a pretty conservative vote on many issues. On some, she may not be, but on some, I believe she will be. So I kind of put her in that middle category. And then solidly on the left, almost always going to vote with the left. Very rarely going to vote to limit congressional commerce power. Very, very rarely going to vote to limit individual rights in any particular way. Going to grant as many rights as they can to everybody and anybody. That's going to be Elena Kagan, Justice Sotomayor, and Justice Breyer, who is the most elderly of the justices. He is the justice that most people on the left are trying to get to retire, so that they can guarantee President Biden will replace Justice Breyer, because as we know, part of the anticipation in 2016, with their belief that Hillary would win handily over Donald Trump, was that justices like Ginsburg and Souter and different justices that ultimately were either going to pass away or retire would be replaced by a Democrat, not a Republican. Didn't work out for them. At the end of the day, I would really prefer it to get to a place where they're not political and they follow the law in their interpretation, and they follow legislative intent, and they follow the text of the Constitution. But unfortunately, at least for one side of the debate, we don't usually end up in that direction. So when the Supreme Court receives an appeal, what's called a writ of certiorari, it's a request by someone for the Supreme Court to hear their case. They will take that to a conference, which is exactly what it sounds like. The 9 justices sit around and they talk about cases that they've already reviewed the documents in, the petition, the documents that have been sent to the court for review. They'll review those, and then they sit in conference and they vote. Do we want to take this case or not? If 4 justices out of 9 agree to take a case, to hear a case, they will set it for oral argument, and they will agree to rule on that case in some kind of ultimate manner. Typically in a year, they'll rule on anywhere from 40 to as many as maybe 90 cases in a particular year. So not very many. If you think about the thousands that they receive for review, the fact that they only ultimately rule on a percent or so of those cases tells you how important the cases are that ultimately get a ruling from the court. So what I want to do with this show is spend part of the show. This first show is it's a little slow in opening, because I want to make sure everybody's kind of level set on what it is that the Supreme Court does, why it's important that they do what they do and who they are. Ultimately, I'm going to read through some of these questions and see if there's any specific questions about the Supreme Court, because I just need everybody to understand completely how important the Supreme Court is to our everyday lives, and how important elections are to shaping that court in a way that is fair to the Constitution. Um, do you believe we're headed to a post constitutional world, a post constitutional United States of America? Sure seems that way, doesn't it? I mean, at some point, the argument is that the Constitution can almost be, um, you know, have one Supreme Court ruling after another that can basically distinguish it into or out of existence. Take it to a place where its enumerations mean very little. The understandings from the Supreme Court and the precedents set by the Supreme Court will mean more than the enumerations in the document itself. I know each of you watching this show, you've probably heard lawyers talk before and you've said, only a lawyer could read something that way. And that's true. I mean, lawyers are trained to find any little hole that they can in an argument, in a phrase, in a term, in a rule, in an exception to a rule, to try to distinguish it in their favor. My argument would be that one side of the political spectrum does that more than anybody else. Um, they probably don't see that as a problem. I've talked to a lot of liberals that don't believe that the fact that they distinguish everything, um, that seems like it's very clear language, they don't see that as a problem. I do. Because again, like I said before, for the best days of America to be ahead, then we've got to be able to return to those founding principles of self determination, equality of opportunity, liberty, freedom, independence. And there's definitely a push right now. Mark Levin calls it American Marxism. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but the reality is it's a push away from self-determination and equality of opportunity to state determination, statism, and equality of outcomes. I'm gonna pause right there because to me it's very important to distinguish between equality of opportunity and equality of outcomes. Equality of outcomes is absurd. We can never provide an equality of outcome. I mean, it's completely impossible. Everywhere that Marxism, communism has been tried, it has failed and failed miserably. Um, yeah, it is very similar to how they portray the Bible. They will try to distinguish the words in the Bible into oblivion to mean nothing. Because if they mean nothing, then nobody has to listen to it. And that's really ultimately the goal. If the Constitution means nothing, then you don't listen to the Constitution. You listen to whomever is determining what the Constitution means at that particular time. And then if they can do that, then it's really, they view elections as very simple propositions for them to be successful with, not just because they cheat, although we know they do, but it's not so much that they cheat directly, it's that they set things up to be very manipulable. People are very manipulable. The recall vote in California was going one way, very clearly going one way, even when Larry Elder had entered the race. And then Gavin Newsom sends everybody $600 checks, calls it stimulus. 2, 3 weeks before the election, sends everybody money. And all of a sudden, his poll numbers go through the roof. I wonder why. I wonder why. I wonder how that happened. And invariably, I told people I work with, I told Kaylee, you watch, they're going to say it's because Larry Elder was the alternative option and he's too conservative. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the fact that people in California expect things to be given to them. I don't mean everybody, but a wide swath of individuals in California that don't pay taxes, that are takers, not producers, expect things to be given to them, and that's exactly what Gavin Newsom gave them. And that makes it very easy to win elections, and they know that. They know it's easier to do that and win elections and have power through that than it is to have power through any kind of super majority dictate like the Constitution. It was won in blood. It was signed on to and agreed to by a supermajority of the states of the United States. Any deviation from that document should have to be agreed to or agreed on in a similar manner. It shouldn't be up to 9 people in robes with lifetime tenure who all of a sudden seem to think it's more important to be liked than to be right. And that's unacceptable to me too, but we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Well, let's talk about it now. Um, I believe it was Gallup started polling people on the approval of the Supreme Court back in about 2000. It was either right before or right after the Bush v. Gore decision. Um, they've done basically annual polling or polling whenever they felt like it was important to do polling of the approval rating of the Supreme Court every year since then. And right now, it's at its lowest approval rating ever. Like 40%, I think, of people approve of the Supreme Court. Well, you and I know that that's because we didn't agree with the way the Supreme Court refused to take up any of the cases related to the election. The Supreme Court did several things at the end of its term that we didn't agree with. Because we don't agree with it, we don't view them in a favorable light. You can't judge the favorability of an institution in a vacuum. In a vacuum, I love the Supreme Court. I love the idea that there's a final arbiter of what things mean. I like that idea, but that doesn't necessarily mean I approve of what they're doing at any particular time. Yeah, exactly. Shirley, you're completely right. There's so many shenanigans that happen in California, and why wouldn't there be? It's easy to control things when you've controlled the state for 60 years, completely unchecked. My heart goes out to the folks in California. I have people that I work with that live in Madera, California, and I love that area. I think it's beautiful. There's so much about California that's easy to love, and it's just unfortunate that it's being run into the ground by liberals. It's terrible. I pray that someday we'll be able to do something about that, but for now it is what it is, I guess. But the Supreme Court is concerned because they don't want to be viewed in a negative light. I think Justice Roberts has decided that he wants his legacy as the chief to be, the chief that kind of held everything together. In doing so, he plays a lot of Machiavellian games where he will, side with a majority just so he can narrow an opinion. There's a lot of little games that you can play in the Supreme Court that I think he plays, and I think that there's some diminishing return to that. So in the short term, it may be helpful to him. It may get some of the goals that he wants met. But in the long term, you got to remember you may be chief, but every one of those 9 judges is very, very, very intelligent. They're fiercely independent. I mean, if you want evidence of that, how about the fact that Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg were best friends right to their deaths, right to Scalia's death? They were very, very best friends. How is that possible for 2 people who are so diametrically opposed to each other politically and in a legal sense? Well, because they're very, very fiercely independent, very intelligent people. And just because they disagreed on the law doesn't mean they can't be friends, and they prove that to be the case. So my point is, he may think he's doing things that can hold the group together and push things in the direction he wants them to go, but it'll backfire. It's too hard to keep that kind of game going for too long. So if Justice Roberts, if you're out there and you hear me saying this, just remember I said that. There's going to come a day when all of the little games that you've played trying to keep everybody together are going to fail, and you're going to fall on your face. And it'll be very evident to the rest of us. This term may provide an opportunity for that. There's a couple of cases I want to talk about that could show us something. So one is out of Mississippi. It's called Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. It's basically the case that you've heard of in the news. That's the challenge to Roe v. Wade. Well, let me explain something about Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade initially said that it was an individual right to privacy that exists in the Constitution that allows for the right to abortion, for a woman to get an abortion. That ruling has been altered and limited over the years by subsequent cases. The case that is most important now basically holds that any abortion after 22 weeks of gestation, those situations can be regulated by the states um, somewhat severely, somewhat harshly. It doesn't mean a state can outright ban abortions after 22 weeks, although it's possible, and I'm not going to get into the details of how that works. But the key piece of information you need to understand is that period of 22 weeks. Why is that important? Well, basically, what the court held was that at 22 weeks, the idea that the child is viable outside of the womb is the key for when the state's ability to protect the child um, becomes mature. So prior to 22 weeks, the state's ability to limit abortion would only be based on whether or not it created an undue burden on the woman's right to an abortion. So in legal speak, that's an easy way of saying probably not going to be able to do it under most circumstances. So the state is at its weakest to protect the unborn child prior to 22 weeks. Post 22 weeks, the state's power is at its strongest. And within those boundaries is a whole bunch of balancing, and it depends on that undue burden test. Well, in Mississippi, they've decided to change that date, that period of gestation that matters, from 22 weeks to 15 weeks. Why? Because at 15 weeks, they've decided through science that that's the time where the fetus is sufficiently um, developed to feel pain, to have other certain human characteristics that they've just decided the instead of it being viability at 22 weeks, it should go to 15 weeks for various other reasons. What the Supreme Court is going to be asked to do is to decide, do we want to change the law? Do we want to change the precedent from the 22-week viability point to something earlier? And if we do that, what kinds of rights on top of that do we want to give the state when it comes to limiting abortion? So there's a real question there for the Supreme Court to evaluate. And I know a lot of people believed that Amy Coney Barrett, because she's got a lot of kids, she's Catholic, and I think to one degree or another, very devout woman. A lot of people believe that if the right challenge came along, and this is kind of an incremental small challenge, so it might be the right challenge, that she would be on the side of limiting abortion. Um, I think Justice Kavanaugh, that most people feel like is about in the same kind of position, although his his position on individual rights has been a little less clear from his previous opinions. Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas. I mean, Thomas is probably a slam dunk. Alito, I believe, is as well. Gorsuch is a little more libertarian, but I think he'd probably go with the other two. So I think that could be the five people that could maybe change that law. Obviously, if there is a change made, that's a big deal. Um, that anything we can do to save babies from abortion is a good thing. So that's going to be a very important case to be decided. The second one that I think is equally as important is the Second Amendment case. There's a case out of New York that basically says in New York, to get a concealed carry permit, to be able to carry your gun with you to protect yourself in the city of New York, or I think in the whole state of New York, you have to have some reason to do so that is a stronger reason than just the general public and general safety. So, for example, if you're a police officer, or even if you were a you know courier of some kind that specifically went into rough neighborhoods, or for example, you're a process server, potentially you could make that a case as a process server that you need to carry a gun. But the idea is, since Heller, the DC versus Heller case came down and said that the Supreme Court ruled that there is an individual right to keep and bear arms for personal protection inside the home. This case out of New York that'll be decided this term is going to say, okay, now that we know there's an individual right inside the home, is there an individual right to keep and bear arms outside the home? It's a small distinction. It's an important distinction, and it's probably a distinction that if it's made, if it's decided that it's an individual right to keep and bear arms outside the home, that probably consumes many of the other distinctions states have made that have prevented people from carrying guns. So, another one of those major cases that could change the way that the Supreme Court um, lays out individual rights of people. Any term where there's one of those cases is important. In this term, there's at least two. Technically, I guess you could make an argument there's three or four because there's a few religion cases coming up too. So let me read this question real quick. So I guess the question that's being asked here. Let me finish up what I was just saying. Leave that question up there for me, Kaylee. I'm gonna go through this question. It's a very good one. I do want to talk about that. That's where I was gonna go next. Um, just to finish up what I'm talking about, this term that had began on Monday, the first Monday in October, is going to be extremely important to set out the tone of this court. It's going to be important for the midterm elections. It's going to be important for the presidential election in 2024. And I think that Chief Justice Roberts would probably just prefer that not much happen. That it kind of comes in like a lion, goes out like a lamb, and doesn't do much. But I think in this case, it's going to come in like a lion and go out like a pterodactyl. I don't know, something something bigger and scarier than a lion, because I really think that the court has been primed, the expectation has been set. Um, people, particularly the 45% or so of very strong conservatives in this country, have an expectation that we will start to return back to a place of individual liberty, including rights of the unborn. And I think this term is going to set the stage for that moving forward. So, very important. That's why I decided to start this law with Lucas when I did. So, let's shift gears and answer this question. The question is basically that President Trump, generally great, but he typically doesn't talk about the V. I can say vaccine. I'm not too worried about it. They try to block me, but I guess, Primetime Patriots is already being shut down on YouTube, and I really don't want it to be shut down on Facebook. So I'll stay away from talking about it in any specific way. But he doesn't talk about it, or he talks about it as a great miracle. Do you think his tongue is tied? Do you think that he's saying what he's saying or not saying what he's not saying because of legal reasons? Okay, so here's the situation. First, if you remember back in May or June of 2019, um, or would it have been 2020? I guess it would have been 2020. 2020. After we had been into this thing, we'd already shut down for 2 weeks. We'd already, made the economy a mess. We were frantic because tens of thousands of people were dying every month, and it was a bad deal. All the scientists pretty much agreed that herd immunity was the way out of this, meaning that enough people had resistance to this virus, whether it be through natural immunity or a vaccine, that the only way out of this mess was going to be herd immunity. It was going to be um, absolutely impossible to get away from its terrible effects without it. Now, what have we learned since then? Number one, therapeutics. Therapeutics, therapeutics, therapeutics. If I said right now, if there's 150 people watching this, and I don't know how many people are watching, but however many people are watching this, I said, raise your hand if you know somebody who was saved by monoclonal antibodies. Everybody's hands would go up. Raise your hand if you know somebody who was saved by remdesivir and dexamethasone. Everybody raise their hands. I am that somebody. I was, I thought I was going to be dead within a few hours before they finally gave me remdesivir and dexamethasone, broke my fever, ended the reign of COVID inside of my body and saved my life. Period. You can't you'll never be able to argue with me otherwise, so don't even try. Is it possible that some of these drugs and some of these vaccines and some of these things are terrible for some people? Absolutely. 100%. Every medication can be very, very bad for someone. And I think there's plenty of good statistics out there, and hopefully it's being studied better than it sounds like it's being studied, that the vaccine is terrible for some people. Doesn't mean it's terrible for everybody. It also doesn't mean it's helpful for everybody. It doesn't mean it's going to get us any closer to herd immunity than people getting it naturally and being cured or healed with therapeutics. I would argue that people getting COVID naturally, developing natural immunity with the help of therapeutics like remdesivir, dexamethasone, maybe you get ivermectin early on or some other prophylactic, or maybe you get a monoclonal antibody. If you develop a natural immunity to the damn thing by yourself, that's going to be much stronger and better than anything else. But if you can't, if you don't, if you're worried, or if you are in a risk category that um, just staying away from COVID altogether is something that you're keen on, the vaccine was at the time the idea, right? So Donald Trump took that on his shoulders and he said, I want to cut all the red tape. I want to make sure that we have funded these folks that can develop these vaccines as thoroughly as we possibly can. And I want to cut the red tape, and I want a vaccine developed within a year. I want it as fast as you can get it. Um, Everybody applauded that move at the time, rightly so, because we felt like, we didn't understand therapeutics the way we understand them now. So things have changed. At the time, it was extremely important, and we saw it as the only way out. We understand things differently now, plain and simple. And that's science. Science is all about questioning science. Science is about continually forming new hypotheses and challenging those and testing those in a way that's repeatable, reviewable, testable constantly and consistently. Anybody disagree with me on that? I didn't think so. That's what science is. That's what it's about. So I'm going to read some of these comments here in a second. But the long and short of it is I think that that's where Trump's at. He's like, I championed these vaccines. They're out there. They are an option. But he also got COVID himself before the vaccine was available. And what did he say? Regeneron and dexamethasone and remdesivir saved his life as well. So he was a big fan of those, as I am. The reality is the disease is deadly. The disease is real. COVID is real. You hear that, Facebook bots? COVID is real. I'm human. I'm sitting here living proof of that. Whatever you can get to help you with it, do it. Do it fast. Be forceful. Be your own advocate. Nobody's going to do it for you. Hospitals and doctors and other people out there are not going to give you the same um, advocacy you can give to yourself. So that's my take on it. I think his hands are a little bit tied. I think that there's so much nuance. His shtick, his his methods are not nuance. He is a club carrying politician, and none of what's going on with COVID is a club that he can smack somebody over the head with. So why do it? I wouldn't, as they say, I wouldn't pee up that rope. That's just me. Um, let's see. What other questions do we have here? Um, Trying to see if there's any more specific areas we could talk about tonight. Let me say it this way, and if you've got a specific question that you want me to answer, put it in the comments right now and I'll try to get to it. But one thing I will say before we wrap up here is First of all, you can follow us, and we're not can. You're going to have to follow us on Rumble and Telegram in the very near future. We've been completely removed from YouTube. They have summarily removed our account completely. We don't intend to follow up with new accounts on YouTube. So, as far as I'm concerned, YouTube can take a flying leap. Facebook, those of you who've heard me before know what I think of Facebook. I think it's a joke. I think it's going to be difficult to declare Facebook, Twitter, etc., a public forum because there's so many. The rules from the Supreme Court have been so tight about that that I think that's difficult. I think that there is a chance that we could go after Facebook at all, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of them through antitrust laws, but that's going to require us making an effort to use some of these other platforms and showing that those companies have, done things that have made it impossible for them to compete. Kayla, I will answer that in just a second. Bottom line, go to Rumble, go to Telegram, follow us there. We're going to be growing the platform, growing the feed on Rumble, and we're going to be doing some really cool things over there in the coming months. So please make sure you're tuned in to Rumble, um, to follow us there. The outcome of the Supreme Court will be so the Supreme Court. There's several outcomes I'm looking at. I think at the end of the day, though, I believe that by the conclusion of this term, it'll be very clear who we can count on to be textualist, originalist, constitutionalist Supreme Court justices. I think that we can count on Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas. I believe we can count on Amy Coney Barrett till she proves otherwise. And I think that Kavanaugh could go either way. I think that the left did a supreme disservice to themselves if what they wanted was him on their side when they went after him with bogus Me Too claims right before he was sworn in as a justice. So right before they confirmed him. So I would say that there's five. Kavanaugh, who knows? I would say Chief Justice Roberts at that point will then start to side with the conservatives more, just so he can guide the opinions. The way that works is the Chief Justice, if he is voting with the majority, then he can assign the opinion for the majority. And the opinion's all that matters. Because if he writes that opinion and he writes it narrowly and he can get you may have an opinion that's signed on to and then three different concurring opinions. The concurring opinions won't necessarily have the force that the opinion has. So if he writes it narrowly, the long and short of it is he can screw crap up. I'm just going to tell you. So he may start to do some of that. We may see some of that. I'll call that out on this show. I'll let you know. When I start hearing some of the oral arguments for these cases, they did the oral argument today for the one of the terrorists. I can't remember his name, Abu Zabaya or whatever. Doesn't matter. But when they start doing the oral arguments for some of these other cases, I'll be sure to pop up and tell you guys about those. Other than that, listen, there's any questions you guys get, please put them on here. Send them to Kaylee, send them to me. Feel free to, I think you can message through Telegram. I know you can send messages on Facebook to PTP Kaylee, to Blake, to me, to whomever. But get us your questions, and if you have legal questions, things particularly of a national concern or even a state concern, I'd be glad to look into them a little bit and give you a little bit of an idea. I won't be able to give specific enough answers that you can rely on them as legal advice. I'm not going to give legal advice on here. I'm going to tell you in a general way kind of how things go with a political spin, my own political spin. So, real quick, um, make sure there's probably a few questions on here I missed. Like I said, send them in to us. We'll get after them. Quit her job as a nurse. What to do about saving your job? I'll tell you this: when it comes to being fired for COVID, make sure you get fired. Don't quit. Don't make their job easy for them. make them fire you, make them lay you off, make them follow all of the rules, make sure you get everything in writing, make sure you don't agree to anything or sign anything, and then turn it over to a lawyer. There's going to be plenty of cases. They have a very strong footing, unfortunately, because of the way that we've looked at this as a public health calamity. So, links to Telegram and Rumble are in the comments. Don't make their job easy for them. That was the final word on the issue of being fired for not getting the vaccine. Um, you know, we'll talk about that another time. There's medical exemptions, religious exemptions, but some of those are not working right now. At the end of the day, they're going to do what they want to do. Just don't make it easy on them. That's the long and short of them. So thank you all. Please find the links to Telegram and Rumble in the comments. Kaylee's got them posted there. Follow Kaylee at PTP Kaylee on Facebook. We are Primetime Patriots is on Facebook and Telegram and Rumble. Particularly on Rumble, right after this show, Kaylee will upload this to Rumble. Get on there. If you leave questions there, I will definitely pull those from the comments and talk about those next week. And I look forward to meeting with all of you again next week. Wednesdays, 7 Central, 8 Eastern, Law with Lucas. We'll talk more. Going to be a fantastic Supreme Court term. Lots going on, lots to be hopeful for. Keep up keep the hope alive, be optimistic, and understand and remember the only difference between liberty and tyranny is you. Thanks, everybody.